London, 1944. A sound no one had ever heard before tore through the morning sky. A sharp, cracking thunder that arrived after the explosion. No sirens, no warning. Only silence and then annihilation. They called it the V2. A 46-foot tower of steel that rose faster than sound and carried a ton of high explosive. It wasn't built by machines. It was built by slaves. Thousands of prisoners from Middle Badora worked to death in underground tunnels, their bodies stacked beside unfinished rockets. Every weapon that hit London cost dozens of lives long before launch. And yet, those same rockets would one day carry the American flag to the moon. That isn't a conspiracy theory. It's history, and it begins not with the dream of spaceflight, but with the collapse of a regime that turned science into theology. When the Reich began to die, its scientists became its only remaining treasure. In the spring of 1945, as Berlin crumbled, the world's new superpowers weren't racing for land or oil. They were racing for brains. At the center of it all stood Wernher von Braun. Elegant, articulate, and utterly pragmatic, he was the kind of man who could smile while showing you blueprints for apocalypse. At Piedmont, he'd led thousands in the creation of the V2, a machine that touched the edge of space before it touched the streets of London. He was 32 years old and already dreaming of Mars. His rockets killed more civilians than soldiers, but he preferred to talk about the curvature of the Earth. When the Allied troops reached Piedmont, they found laboratories still humming, test stands intact, and engineers waiting quietly at their desks. Von Braun and his colleagues had packed their suitcases with formulas, photographs, and the future of modern rocketry. They also carried their SS membership cards, proof that genius and guilt can share the same pocket. As Germany surrendered, a new operation began in silence. Overcast, soon renamed Paperclip. The United States formed special teams to locate and extract scientists before the Soviets did. For every scientist captured, there was a new weapon America wouldn't have to face later. Morality was a luxury no superpower could afford. Officially, the men of Piedmont should have been tried as war criminals. Unofficially, they were too valuable to lose, so their files were rewritten, party affiliations deleted, SS ranks quietly erased under the stroke of a typewriter and a small bent piece of metal, a paperclip. Each clip meant a new identity, a clean slate, a ticket to the new world. Von Braun and more than 100 others were sent to Fort Bliss, Texas. They stepped off army trucks into the desert sun, traded their black uniforms for khaki, and began building the future of the United States. Their V2 rockets, once aimed at London, now streaked into the blue sky over New Mexico, filmed by U.S. Army newsreels that called them weapons of peace. No mention of the tunnels, the corpses, or the oaths to Hitler, only progress, precision, and patriotism. Asked later about his past, von Braun replied softly, "My concern was always rockets, not politics." It was an answer Washington found comforting. America needed results more than confessions. Across the Iron Curtain, Stalin's generals were conducting their own raid. In one October night of 1946, Operation Osoaviakim swept through the ruins of eastern Germany. 2,000 German engineers and their families were loaded onto trains bound for the Soviet Union. They didn't have new names. They had guards. For the next decade, both superpowers would be powered by German mathematics. Back in America, the tests at White Sands Proving Ground lit the desert like a second sunrise. Each V2 launch rose with the ghost of Middlework clinging to its tail. The same rocket that once fell on London now drew contrails over New Mexico, the first step toward the stars. A generation later, when the Saturn V thundered off the pad at Cape Canaveral and carried Neil Armstrong toward the moon, its engines bore the fingerprints of the same men who once served the Third Reich. History had come full circle. Humanity had escaped gravity, but not its own conscience. That was the price of progress, paid in silence and signed with a paperclip. The Reich was dying, but its science lived on. As Allied forces advanced, a quiet scavenger hunt began. American, British, and Soviet units raced toward German laboratories, toward Piedmont, toward Middlework, toward hell itself. The prize was knowledge. Rockets, jets, chemicals. Every blueprint was a ticket to the next war. The Americans moved fast. General Eisenhower had authorized special technical intelligence teams to seize laboratories before the Soviets could. One of them, led by Colonel Holger Toftoy, reached Nordhausen, the V2 factory, just days before the Red Army arrived. They found the tunnels filled with corpses, machines still humming, half-finished rockets stacked like coffins. Among the bodies lay the future of American spaceflight. Meanwhile, von Braun's team was hiding in the Bavarian Alps. They'd heard rumors that the SS planned to execute them to prevent their capture. So they fled, engineers with suitcases full of equations, surrendering to the Americans near Oberammergau. The first thing they did was hand over their research. Von Braun told the Americans he'd only wanted to reach the stars. He left out the part about the thousands who died building his rockets underground. Tolstoy didn't ask. Instead, he made an offer. In exchange for their cooperation, the Germans would receive protection and a new life. Within weeks, they were quietly flown to America under false names. The operation's code name, Paperclip. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to extract their knowledge. But science is addictive, and America was hooked. Soon, the Army Ballistic Missile Agency in Huntsville, Alabama, became the new Piedmont. The same men, the same leader, the same obsession with speed and thrust. Only now their employer was the United States government. They lived in suburban houses, sent their children to church, and built missiles for democracy. In public, they were rebranded as German specialists. In private, they were America's secret weapon against the Soviet Union. The moral gymnastics were staggering. Journalists who dug too deep were silenced or reassigned. Declassified memos later revealed that the CIA forged denazification certificates for more than 700 individuals. Each paperclip erased a past. Each erasure bought a future. And on the other side of the world, the Soviets were doing the same, only louder. In the occupied zone, they dismantled entire factories and shipped them east. They took engineers, machines, and even families. When the Germans arrived in the USSR, they were greeted not with medals but with guards and translators. Their new laboratories were fenced compounds near Moscow and Kaliningrad. It was the dawn of a new kind of war, one fought with laboratories, not armies. The Cold War had begun before the Hot War had even cooled. In the late 1940s, the American public was told that the war had brought peace. But beneath the calm, the laboratories of Paperclip were roaring. At White Sands, rockets built from V2 parts leapt into the sky, reaching heights no American machine ever had. Each launch was hailed as a triumph of ingenuity. Few mentioned that the blueprints came from Piedmont. At Fort Bliss, von Braun's team began designing something new, a rocket that could reach not London but the edge of space. The Army called it research. Historians would later call it the birth of the missile age. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union tested its own trophies. A young engineer named Sergei Korolev, recently freed from a gulag, studied the captured V2s with fanatical focus. He'd once been accused of wasting state resources. Now he was the USSR's best chance at catching up. Korolev understood the secret the Nazis had discovered, that a rocket wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement of civilization. He would prove that socialism could reach the stars before capitalism did. The stage was set. Two superpowers, two philosophies, one origin story written in German. Back in the United States, von Braun's image was carefully polished. By 1952, Life magazine called him the man who will take us to the moon. His accent was charming, his past politely ignored. He appeared on television, smiling beside models of rockets taller than churches. Children wrote him fan letters. No one asked about Dora or Middlework. America had chosen to forget. In the age of nuclear fear, redemption came easily to those who could aim a missile. In Huntsville, Alabama, von Braun's engineers created the Redstone and Jupiter rockets, the backbone of America's early missile program. In Moscow, Korolev unveiled the R-7, the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile. Its payload could reach the United States. But instead of bombs, he filled it with something smaller, a silver sphere the size of a beach ball. It was called Sputnik. The space race had begun, and the ghosts of Piedmont had chosen sides. When Sputnik beeped across the night sky in 1957, the world gasped. The Soviet Union had reached space first. For Washington, it was humiliation. For von Braun, it was opportunity. Within weeks, the Pentagon turned to the man they'd once hidden. His Redstone team was given a new mandate: catch up. By early 1958, Explorer 1, America's first satellite, rose into orbit. The voice that narrated the launch? The same accent that once guided V2s toward London. Publicly, von Braun became the face of American spaceflight. Privately, he was haunted by the irony. The same designs that had bombed Britain were now celebrated as symbols of freedom. In 1958, NASA was founded. Von Braun's team moved from the Army to a civilian agency, bringing their blueprints with them. The new director welcomed them as pioneers, not prisoners. The Cold War had sanctified them. If the Soviets had Korolev, America had von Braun, and the competition would be cosmic. Under von Braun's guidance, NASA built the Saturn rockets. Each launch towered over the past like a cathedral of steel. Each bolt, each valve, a confession of what human beings would do for progress. And while America watched astronauts smile for cameras, the world forgot where it began, in tunnels filled with corpses under a mountain called Middlework. By the 1960s, the space race had become a moral paradox wrapped in patriotic pride. Von Braun stood beside Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, promising to reach the moon. No one mentioned his SS rank or his visit to Dora. He'd been reborn, not as a Nazi but as a visionary. In 1969, Apollo 11 lifted off. The engines that carried it skyward were powered by the same equations written in Piedmont 3 decades earlier. When Armstrong stepped onto the moon, television announcers called it a victory for all mankind. But in the control room, one man's face carried a deeper story. Von Braun had done it. He had reached the stars. The world forgave him because it needed his genius. Science had triumphed. Morality had not. After the moon landing, von Braun became a national celebrity. He toured universities, appeared in Disney films about the future, and posed for magazine covers. But inside NASA, a new generation saw him differently. To them, he was a relic of compromise, the man who proved that success could bury guilt. By the time he died in 1977, his name was etched in marble at Huntsville. The man who once served Hitler was now buried under the flag of the United States. Operation Paperclip officially ended in 1959, but its consequences never did. The Cold War that followed was built on German foundations. Missiles, jet engines, chemical warfare, even early computers, all born from captured knowledge. For every von Braun who became a hero, there were dozens whose names vanished into classified archives. Men who'd tested nerve gas on prisoners, designed concentration camp experiments, or perfected biological weapons. They found new jobs in America under new names. The pursuit of power demanded amnesia. The same program that built rockets to reach the moon also built missiles that could end civilization in 20 minutes. That was the paradox of progress. To rise above the Earth, humanity first had to learn how to destroy it. And yet, there was another legacy, the silent one. The refugees, the victims, the millions whose suffering had powered the machine of war. Their stories didn't make it into the textbooks or the launch ceremonies. But without them, there would be no rockets, no Cold War, no Apollo. Today, every photograph of a Saturn V, every museum display of a V2, carries that dual meaning, triumph and tragedy welded together. The moral line that was crossed in 1945 has never fully been redrawn. Von Braun once said, "We can lick gravity, but sometimes the paperwork is overwhelming." He was joking, of course, but he was right, because in the end, the paperwork, the lies, the forged files, the paperclips, changed history more than any explosion ever could. Operation Paperclip was not just a mission. It was a turning point. The moment humanity decided that morality could be postponed for the sake of progress. And we've been living in its shadow ever since. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy thoughtful takes on how technology and history intertwine, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this one.